Good morning, everyone. We are now ready to begin. This week is the Parsha of Beha'alosecha. So we're going to study an interesting passage and narrative at the end of the Parsha. The scene is that recently Moshe Rabbeinu, through a whole process, began to involve other people in his leadership role. There's the 70 elders, which Moshe Rabbeinu took from some of his prophecy, emanated some of his spirituality upon these 70 elders. And thus, there was prophecy amongst many, many more Jewish leaders in addition to Moshe Rabbeinu. And at that point, there was two leaders whose name was Eldad and Medad, and they began to prophesize in the camp. At this point, the Torah tells us that Miriam, the Moshe Rabbeinu's sister, and Tzipporah, Moshe Rabbeinu's wife, had a conversation. We're clued into this because Rashi and the commentators tell us about this. And Tzipporah remarks, Moshe Rabbeinu's wife remarks to Miriam, and she says that, the fact that Eldad and Medad are prophesizing right now, I feel bad for their wives, because at this point, now that they're becoming prophets, they will now separate from their wives. They will not live with them anymore, just like Moshe Rabbeinu did with me. So this was the first time that Miriam got wind of the fact that Moshe and his wife Tzipporah were no longer living together. And this was shocking news. This was a big breaking story. Immediately, Miriam, instead of keeping this information to herself, she right away runs to Aaron and says the following. She says, "Listen, did you hear what I just heard? That Moshe Rabbeinu, this is the breaking news, the breaking story. Moshe Rabbeinu is now not living with Tzipporah any longer." According to some, this was even said in the presence of Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is something that's really hard to understand, because if the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu is not living with Tzipporah is because of the fact that he is a prophet and he has to be in a state of purity, in a state of piety, so Hashem speaks to us too. He communicates with me, with Miriam, with Aaron. We are also prophets, and yet we are able to maintain our lives just like everybody else. So what's up with this? This is what Miriam tells Aaron, and Moshe Rabbeinu does not respond to this to these questions and to all this insinuation of Miriam. And in response to Miriam's exclamation, the Torah says one of the greatest attributes that a person could and one of the greatest tributes that one can receive from Hashem himself, and that is, the Torah says that the Ish Moshe, the man Moshe Rabbeinu, was the most humble person upon the face of the earth. This is something that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say in his own defense. In fact, according to Ramban, according to Nachmanides, the Torah says it in Moshe's defense because Moshe Rabbeinu, being that he was so humble, he wouldn't speak up, he wouldn't answer back to these questions and inquisitive inquiries of Miriam, and therefore Hashem had to stand up to his honor. And therefore the Torah lays forth one of the greatest tributes you could say about a person. The Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble, and in fact, subsequent to that, the Torah speaks about the intimate and unique relationship that Moshe Rabbeinu shared with Hashem that was exclusive. Hashem spoke to him whenever, not even when he was without preparation, as a person speaks to a friend. Incredible adulation and compliments of Moshe Rabbeinu. So here today we're gonna explore this notion of Moshe Rabbeinu's humility, the fact that he was so humble. So first of all, it's striking in the fact that when Miriam makes these remarks to Moshe Rabbeinu, he doesn't respond. Because we know in general in life, when people mix into our business, it's not something that we like. Especially things that are so private in nature, something that is very, very personal and intimate between Moshe and his wife Tzipporah. This information was not out there until this point. So Moshe Rabbeinu simply could have said, Miriam, you're my sister, you're amazing, but you know what? I don't know what you ate for dinner last night. I don't mix into your business. You don't mix into my business. And that's it. Moshe Rabbeinu could have simply laid the whole thing to rest. But he doesn't do that. Clearly, there's some element of humility. Moshe Rabbeinu is not aggressive enough, apparently, with his sister. And this raises the question as to the temperament and the disposition of Moshe Rabbeinu. The question is, and we need a definition as to what the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu is, because on the one hand, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't answer back. So perhaps he doesn't have that kind of nature. Yet we see throughout history, he stands up to Paro, one of the most evil dictators in history, oppressors, abusers. Moshe Rabbeinu has no problem speaking after, of course, he is convinced by Hashem, but he stands up to evil, speaks truth to power. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to do that. And yet when Miriam has some issue with his personal marital issues, he does not answer back. So if Moshe Rabbeinu was so great and so powerful, we're talking about a person who had a very, very special relationship with Hashem. He went up to heaven 3 times, studied Torah with Hashem. He had a chavrusa, 40 days and nights. Why does Miriam think that she could get away with this? And to the extent that Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't even answer back. Why doesn't he answer back? And number 2, if he is not of that caliber, how is he able to do everything else? How is he able to lead the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim and lead them through all the trials and tribulations for 40 years throughout the desert? So we need a good working definition as to what the Torah refers to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was an anav. He was such a humble person, the most humble person on the face of the earth. So the Talmud, when it talks about the humility of Moshe, it contrasts the difference between the humility we find by other greats in Jewish history. Avraham Avinu famously said when he was petitioning Hashem to save the people of the population of Sodom, he says, "Vanochi afar ve'efer Hashem, I am but dust and ashes." Sounds pretty humble to me. He's nothing. I'm just like the dust of the earth. We find by David HaMelech, King David, he says, "Vanochi solas, I am like a worm, a lowly insect." But we find that by Moshe Rabbeinu, he said something more. He says, "V'nachnu ma, what am I?" In other words, by contrast to Avraham and David, they were very, very low and they were very, very humble. But yet there was some kind of entity, there was some kind of object or existence, whether it was dust, ashes, worm. Moshe Rabbeinu says about himself and of Aaron, "V'nachnu ma, what are we? We are but nothing at all." So we see a very, very extreme element of humility here. In fact, we find later in the parsha of Pinchas, when Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that it's time to pass on the torch to the next leader, and Yehoshua is the candidate to take over the mantle of leadership, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that part of the process of appointing Yehoshua is that you should take your hand and do smicha. You should lean, which symbolically is the transfer of power from Moshe Rabbeinu to Yehoshua. V'samachta yadacha alav, you should take your hand and lean it upon Yehoshua. And yet we find that when Moshe Rabbeinu in fact does confer the power to Yehoshua through, and it's symbolized through the smicha, it says vayismach shtei yadav. He took both hands. So Rashi observes that Moshe Rabbeinu actually did something more than Hashem required or requested. Hashem told him to lean with one hand. Moshe Rabbeinu leaned with 2 hands. Because, as Rashi says, Ba'ayin Yafa, Moshe Rabbeinu did something with a very generous heart. In other words, when it comes to giving over power to another person, when you have to pass over the reins, to let go of the leadership, It's something that is very, very difficult. And sometimes certain people feel that they were very successful, very accomplished in their position or career, and the person that will succeed them, they don't necessarily want them to do better than them. Of course, they want their enterprise, they want their project or legacy to continue, but they want to be the successful one. And therefore, they wouldn't mind if the person who takes them over goes down a peg or two. But Moshe Rabbeinu was so generous. He was so humble in the sense that when it came to Yoshua, he actually did more than Hashem wanted. He wanted Yoshua to succeed even better than he. So what is the Jewish perspective on what humility is? We always have our concept of what humility is, and if we don't understand it properly, we can have a very, very profound misconception or misunderstand what humility is all about. So before we speak about what it is about, let's identify what it isn't. Humility cannot be something that is false, something that in essence we actually feel proud, we feel arrogant, that is, or conceited. They know that the famous joke they say about in the shul, there was the rabbi was on Yom Kippur, and he's in a moment full of altruism and self-effacement. He starts saying the al chet and ashamnu, and he says, "Oi, I'm nothing, I'm nothing." And then the president of the shul, he sees this, he gets inspired. He says, "Oi, I'm nothing, I'm nothing." And the cantor, the chazan, Shamnu, Bagadnu, I'm nothing, Hashem, I'm nothing. And then in the back of the shul, there's this little Yankala who's some poor person in the back, and he says, "Oh, yeah, I'm nothing, I'm nothing." And the rabbi looks at Shlomo, and he turns to the cantor and he says, "Oh, look who thinks he's a nothing. That guy's a real garnished." So sometimes people feel that they say that they're nothing, but it's actually the greatest affirmation of their egotism and their narcissism, because they feel that to be humble is just another compliment or another facet of the completeness of their self-esteem and their ego and their personality. But it's not that they are truly humble. So clearly, false modesty is the very opposite of what it means to be humble. We have to feel truly humble in our own lives. But then there has been throughout history, whether it was Musar or other streams of thought, who spoke about a very interesting concept. And that is that to be humble means that you look around, you look at your life, and you look at the people around you, and you feel very, very low. And the reason is, and you truly do feel low. And the reason for that is because you come to realize that because of your amazing potential, the amazing abilities that you are given, you realize that you're not living up to them. You're not realizing your potential in life. And therefore, it makes you feel incredibly humble, because you look around and say, I could be so much better. And if I'm not living up to my potential, that means I'm a very, very low person. There are people out there who may be less talented than me, but because they are fulfilling their potential, they're realizing all of their talents, so therefore they are better off than me. So therefore, Musar and other streams of thought have advocated that people should look around at everyone in their lives and actually feel less significant, less important than anyone they encounter. Because if you don't live up to your potential, you are worse off than even an animal. At least animals, they do what they're supposed to do. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, there's so much greatness, there's so much potential in your life, and you don't live up to it, so then you're actually very, very low indeed. And therefore, a person should go around, and each person that they encounter, they should look at them as that they're better than them. That is what many, many traditional perspectives of Musar have advocated through many, many generations. And this is not false. It's honest. It's sincere. It's authentic. You actually do feel humble in the presence of these people because you actually feel that they are indeed greater than you. What's the problem? The problem is that when a person has low self-esteem, the Baal Shem Tov once explained a very, very powerful idea. He says that the truth is a person's humility should not stem from a sense of low self-esteem. Because the truth is, if you feel low about your abilities, if you feel down about your abilities and potential, it could actually lead to something very catastrophic. Because the truth is, we are very, very powerful. All of the cosmos, the entire world hinge on our good deeds. When you do a mitzvah, you are radically transforming and elevating and having a very, very profound impact, not just on your own lives and the people around you, but it reverberates throughout the entire cosmos, throughout the entire world. But that is when you do a good thing, and if you, God forbid, do a negative thing, that could also have a very, very negative, a very profoundly negative impact on the entire world. So, in the end of the day, whether you do good or, God forbid, the opposite, it matters. It's something that is very, very important. But if a person thinks to themselves and says, who am I? What am I? What I'm doing doesn't make a difference in life at the end of the day. So then what happens is this person, because they realize that because they feel so insignificant, so maybe it absolves them of feeling great responsibility in life or accomplishing great things. But in the end, what it does is it is completely and utterly dangerous. It could have devastating and destructive consequence. He brings the famous story in the Talmud, Baal Shem Tov does, in the Talmud of Gittin, in the narrative of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and we know how the story began. There was this fellow Bar Kamsa who had a beef with Kamsa, and he decided, because he was embarrassed, humiliated at a party, he was gonna do it in to the Jewish people. And he goes to the Caesar in Rome, and he says the Jewish people are rebelling against you, and he says, prove it. Well, I'm going to bring a sacrifice, and they won't accept it. And thus he brings this sacrifice to the Beis Hamikdash, and on the way he makes a little blemish on the animal, something that for a non-Jew it would be insignificant, but it would be unacceptable. They would reject this sacrifice if he brought it to the Beis Hamikdash. But when he brought it to the Beis Hamikdash, the rabbis saw right away what was going on, and they said, listen, we need to bring the sacrifice because it's on behalf of the Roman emperor. And there was this individual whose name was Reb Zechariah ben Avkilos. And he said, hang on, we can't do this. We can't offer a sacrifice of an animal that is blemished. People are going to say that we offer blemished sacrifices. So the rabbi says, okay, if we cannot offer the sacrifice that's blemished, but we have this fellow Bar Kamsa who's going to go back to the king, to the emperor, and is going to say that we are rebellious, we are rejecting his sacrifice. We must kill him. That's the only way. Otherwise, we're in deep trouble. Rabbi Zechariah said, I hear you. However, we cannot do that, because people are going to say, if someone attempts to bring a blemished sacrifice, he will receive the death penalty. We can't do that either. So we can't accept the sacrifice, and we cannot punish this person for attempting to bring the sacrifice or preempt what kind of actions he will take in the future. And indeed, they let him get away, and the rest is history. They started they accused the Jewish people of rebellion, and in short time, the Romans besieged Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim, and the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. And the Chachamim observe in the Talmud that it was the Anvasanusai, to be, which many interpret to mean from the word of Anivos, Anava, humility. It was the humility of Rab Zechariah that destroyed our Beis Hamikdash, our temple, burned the Holy of Holies, and exiled us out of our dear precious land. Which means that because Reb Zechariah couldn't take a position, he was so humble, he didn't want to stand up to this Bar Kamsa. He didn't want to take decisive action. He didn't either want to offer the sacrifice as a momentary, temporary suspension of the halacha in order to save the Jewish people. He wasn't willing to take a stand and to execute this person to prevent him from massacring, to informing on the Jewish people. It is because of this that led to the inevitable destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Baal Shem Tov takes from this story, he says, you see what happens? And of course, the story we can understand on many levels, but at least in this interpretation of the Baal Shem Tov, what happened over here is that it may seem on the outset quite pious and righteous. This person said, I'm a nobody. Who am I going to go and say, don't bring the sacrifice, execute this person? These are such large, great decisions that only people with broad shoulders that are willing to take the responsibility, that could stand in the moment, stand up to the occasion, rise up and make a decision. Who am I? I can't do that. And because Reb Zechariah didn't believe in that power, he was too humble. Humble in the sense, in this interpretation, his humility was actually holding him back. It was a low self-esteem. Didn't believe that he was great enough to make that kind of decision. It had catastrophic consequences. So Baal Shem Tov says, remember, when we talk about anivus, when we talk about humility, it should not be something that diminishes our self-image, our own feeling of greatness. We have to know, as Chassidus tells us, Hashem Tzilcha, that God is our shadow, which one of the meanings is, the Maggid of Mezrich says that just like a shadow mimics every move that we make, so too, Hashem, in a sense, is like our shadow. We create the reality, we create the energy around us and determine what should be. So if we believe in that kind of greatness, if we believe in that ability to change our lives and to make a profound impact and difference in the world around us, that does not stem from thinking very low about ourselves. So what should we do? So what we need to do is we need to understand, what does Chassidus say? What is the true humility? We know it does not mean that a person, on the one hand, feels great, but doesn't show it. That's not true humility, because a person actually does not, on the inside, does not truly feel humble. On the other hand, it does not mean that you feel low and down about yourself, a low self-esteem. That's not healthy. That's not productive. They tell about this. There's this rabbi who's from Russia, and he was then later a chief rabbi in the British Empire, Rabbi Chaskel Abramsky. So at some point there was a issue. There was some opposition to ritual shchita, ritual slaughter, and it was brought to a court, and he came in to defend the shchita. So the judge is reading through this deposition or the defense of this rabbi. So the judge says, "Rabbi, I see it says over here that you are the foremost authority on Jewish law, on halacha. Is that true?" So the rabbi says, "Yes, Your Honor, that is correct. And it says over here that you are the foremost and leading authority on all of Jewish matters related to the British Empire. Is that true?" "Yes, Your Honor, that too is correct. And it says over here, Rabbi, that you are the greatest and the greatest spokesman on behalf of all of the Jews in the British Empire. Is that true as well?" "Yes, Your Honor, that too is correct." So the judge turns to the rabbi and says, "Rabbi, listen, a little bit of humility. What about this? You're the greatest rabbi, and you're the greatest authority on Jewish law and the greatest speaker. What's with your humility?" So the rabbi answers, "Your Honor, what should I do? I'm under oath." So all of us, sometimes if you put us under oath and you ask, how do you truly feel? Do you feel humble? Do you feel that you're great? Or do you feel that you are not so important? So on the one hand, you have to be honest with yourself. If we feel very, very proud about our abilities, about our talents, that might not be so bad. But you have to be honest with yourself. Because if you're not honest, then that has nothing to do with humility. But just like a person has to be honest with themselves with their abilities, they can't be dishonest and in denial. In other words, if you are truly talented, if you are truly wise, but you go around and you feel that you're not wise, you feel that you're dumb, that's not humility. If you are strong and you feel weak, that's not humility. That is dishonesty. That is counterproductive. If you are a person who is very, very talented in music and you don't feel like that, if you feel that I'm not so skilled, I don't have the ability to play music nicely or write or speak or any gift that you may have in life, then that's not humility. That's falsehood, that's dishonesty, and it's downright not smart. It's not helpful and it's not productive. So what does Chassidus say? What does Jewish mysticism have to say about humility and how that could be productive in life? The answer is that we look at Moshe Rabbeinu, and he is the paradigm. He is the model for what it means to be humble. Moshe Rabbeinu was not in denial of the fact that he had unique, unparalleled gifts from Hashem. His ability of prophecy, his facility to teach, as we call him Moshe Rabbeinu, to communicate, to transfer and to transmit the words of Hashem. He was the consummate teacher. All of these gifts that he had, he knew about them. He knew how talented he was. So how could he not be humble? If a person knows how special they are, if a person knows that they're good looking, if they know they're handsome, they know they're smart, how do you not be arrogant? How can you not be boastful? How can you not be full of yourself? The answer is that Moshe Rabbeinu knew that everything that he had in his life, he knew about it. But he also knew another important thing. He knew that whatever he had was not his. Whatever he had was not earned. Whatever gifts, whatever resources he had in life was a gift from Hashem. So, on the one hand, he knew what he had. But on the other hand, what he had wasn't his. So what is there to be proud about? What is there to boast about? If a person were to give you beautiful diamonds and gold and silver and says, here, take this, watch it for me, I'm going on vacation for a week. So on the one hand, you're holding beautiful, dazzling diamonds and sapphires, amazing. But yet, you know it's not yours. So are you going to go around and show off to all your friends, look what I have? You may enjoy it. It may make you feel good. But on the other hand, you know that it's not yours. So Moshe Rabbeinu looked at everything that he had, and he came to the realization that the more he understood, so this is interesting, the more you know yourself, the more honest you are, the more clear you are about your abilities and your talents, it actually makes you feel more humble. Because you know that that everything you have isn't yours. In fact, Moshe Rabbeinu actually felt that if someone else had his resources, had his abilities, would actually do better. Because what's the difference? It wasn't his. It wasn't something that he earned. So therefore, if someone else had those resources, perhaps that person could be doing better, utilize them to a greater extent. That made him feel humble in everybody's presence. But it wasn't a debilitating, it wasn't a paralyzing, immobilizing humility. It was the most empowering, was the most inspiring, because he came to realize that everything that he has, the more he would self-efface, the more humble he was, the greater he'd become. Because now the less of his existence, the more the presence of Hashem could shine in his space. So ironically, the more humble you are, the greater you are. And this is something that we see a lot by the Rebbe. There's a story many years ago. There was a dispute, a conflict between the Chabad Hasidim and another sect of Hasidim. They were divided on various ideological issues, but as the nature is, when you have these different perspectives and points of view, it could get quite contentious emotionally, and there were it became to a point the tension was very, very great. The Chabad Hasidim wouldn't even feel comfortable to walk in those neighborhoods, and was quite difficult. And at that time, there was a Chabad woman who was a teacher in this other sect of Hasidim in their school. And when the tensions started to bubble over, she was summarily dismissed from her position. She was fired. The whole situation became untenable, and she was dismissed. And it was very, very difficult for her. It was middle of the school year, and she grew attached to her students, and she invested a lot in them, and it was very, very hard for her. So she went to the Rebbe and complained about her predicament. She spoke about how she was a teacher, and she became very attached. And she said it's not fair. They arbitrarily dismissed her without any excuse, without any probable cause. And this is what she relayed to the Rebbe. And she thought that, of course, the Rebbe would do something that would intervene, maybe call them, especially because it wasn't her fault. She was just collateral damage in this dispute. And she thought that the Rebbe would really take her side. But of course, the Rebbe's response was anything but typical, and it actually shocked her. The Rebbe said to her like this: I want you to get in touch with the new teacher. Find out who is going to be the new teacher who's taking you over. I want you to reach out to her. And I want you to go over with her all the students of the class and speak about all the progress that you've made, what you've taught, the lessons until this point in the year. Go through all the students, their strengths and their weaknesses, and give that all over to the teacher. Since it's the middle of the year, if a new teacher is going to now come in and try to take you over without being caught up in all the particulars, it's not right to the students, because by the time she figures out what's going on and learning the ropes of this class and all the ins and outs, many, many months will be lost. And it's not right, and it's not fair to the students. They should lose out because one of their teachers is being dismissed, and then there's a new teacher who's taking over. They're going to lose many, many months of study. So that's what I want you to do. This approach of the Rebbe totally shocked this teacher, and it gives us pause. It makes us really think about things. A natural reaction in this episode, particularly in a very, very contentious and heated and dispute, and both sides weren't just arguing over some abstract thing. Each one truly believed their path was noble and righteous, and they were doing it to defend the honor of Hashem and their path of Chassidus, their Rebbe, and so on. And when you become embroiled in this debate, in this fight, as you see, there was all kinds of consequences, and yet the Rebbe never got caught up in that and to become vindictive and to become all emotional about it. The Rebbe is right away thinking about the good and the benefit of the students. That's what all the Rebbe cared about. But how are you able to reach that level? How do you arrive to that kind of conclusion? Naturally, this teacher gets fired. We expect a retaliation, or at the very least, calling up, trying to get her back into her job. This response of the Rebbe is totally unexpected. So where does it come from? And this circles us. From this, we can circle back to the story of Moshe Rabbeinu and his encounter with his sister in the end of this week's parsha, where Miriam is getting into the most private, intimate aspects and details of his life. And we naturally expect Moshe Rabbeinu to respond, mix out, stay out of my business. I don't tell you what to do. You don't tell me what to do. But he doesn't. He doesn't say anything. This is what humility is all about. If you don't take yourself so seriously, if you don't think that you're so important, in today's society, somebody makes a few dollars, or they become some celebrity, they sing a song, they hit a home run. All of a sudden, they think of themselves as they're talking themselves in third person. They're talking to themselves like they're some deity, And you have to figure out, how can we speak to this person? How can we get a hold of them? How could we make sure we say the right thing? We don't, their fragile ego, we don't say the wrong thing. In today's society, it's people who are far less important, who have accomplished far less than a Moshe Rabbeinu or a Rebbe, and yet they think of themselves as the greatest gift to mankind. And yet, someone like Moshe Rabbeinu, he doesn't. Someone, as much as he's accomplished, as the resume that Moshe Rabbeinu has, and yet when Miriam says this kind of comment, he has no response. He doesn't say anything back. Because he truly, truly was humble. He did not feel that his life, his accomplishments, his achievements, anything that he had was truly his. He did not feel that he was actually better or more important than the next person. And that's the distinction. To be humble doesn't mean that you think less of yourself and your abilities. Moshe Rabbeinu knew about his abilities better than anybody. He was honest with himself. And therefore, if you're honest with yourself, you know about your powers, you know that there's much to do, much to accomplish. You realize you could make a tremendous impact on yourself, on others. But when you know that what you have is not yours, then you don't take yourself so seriously. And when someone slights you, when someone says something to you, then it is a lot easier to deal with it. Whether it's a spouse, whether it's a relative, a sibling, or somebody, a coworker, or anybody tells you something, your response to that is going to be totally, totally different. Because you know who you truly are. They tell the story of a king who was once out hunting, and he came upon a shepherd who was sitting watching, grazing with the flock. And the king strikes up a conversation with him, and he was quite impressed with the shepherd. It was totally unexpected. This shepherd is giving him some profound insights and perspectives. And the king was very impressed. It was a little while later, the king goes hunting again, and he comes across this shepherd once again, and he gets into a deeper conversation, different perspectives, and he's really, really impressed. And therefore, he offers the shepherd to come with him to his palace, and he appoints him in a certain position. And over time, this shepherd begins to become more influential. As time, he's impressing the king more and more, until he climbs the ranks very swiftly to become the king's chief advisor, the treasurer, the most trusted person that the king has. And all the other advisors of the king are naturally very jealous. And they're trying to figure out, how can we topple this guy? How can we bring him down? And they say to themselves, somebody who has such a meteoric rise so fast, cutting all these corners, there's something here. There must be something about this guy that he's doing wrong. It must be. If he's becoming so influential and now he's already the treasurer, he must be stealing from the king. There's no other way. How else would he get to where he is? He's embezzling, self-enrichment. There's something there. And so they begin to follow this guy and find, where is it? Where can we find that it was clear in their mind that he was taking the money. They just didn't know where he was hiding it, when was he able to do it. So they follow this guy a whole day from morning to night. And they can't find anything about it. There's nothing. He's squeaky clean. The only thing they see is that every single day, at the end of the day, when he goes into his home, there's this little room over there that's locked the entire day, all the time. Only once a day he goes in to that room, he locks the door behind him, he's in there for a few moments, and then he comes out. And they try to open it, it's locked, they can't get in. They say, this is it. This is where we're going to get him. And so they said, we know for sure this is where he's keeping all the money. This is where it's all going down. And so they go to the king and they say, Your Highness, Your Majesty, you have this shepherd that you've promoted to such high office in the land. We know he is taking advantage of you. He's scamming you. He's stealing from you. King says, impossible, it can't be. He says, well, we know where the goods are. There's a room over there in his home, and that's where it's all going down. So the king is very intrigued, and he tells the shepherd, okay, who's now his consultant, his advisor, please, I need to see your room. He says, sorry, your majesty, I can't do it. And now he's really, really intrigued. He says, take me there right now. Please, there's nothing there. It's not important. I'm embarrassed to show you. The king is adamant. I need to see the place right now. And so he takes him to his home and he opens up the door. And what does he see inside there? It's not the money. Inside that room, it's completely bare, completely empty, except in one corner is the staff from when he was a shepherd, his cloak, and his backpack. Basically, the articles of clothes that he had as a shepherd. And the king is looking at it, and he is mystified. And he turns to this former shepherd and says, tell me, what is this all about? And he says, Your Majesty, let me explain to you. When you came to me and offered that I should join you in your palace with all the glamour and the glitz and that whole thing, I was very, very worried. I was a very, very simple shepherd, unsophisticated. And here I'm going to come to all of this. I was afraid I'd be corrupted. I was afraid that all of the dazzling allure of politics would get to me. How would I retain my innocence? How would I ensure that I don't become corrupted? I wouldn't embezzle. So what I did was I decided to keep a certain part of my life from my previous life. And that's this room. Every single day after a long day, I come into this room and I look at my staff, I look at my cloak, I look at my backpack that I had as a shepherd, and I remember my humble beginnings. And I remember that in truth, in essence, who am I really? This is who I am. I'm the shepherd. All of this that I have, it's not really me. I go through all the actions and the motions throughout the day. But this keeps me honest. This keeps me tethered and anchored into my true integrity, my true innocence, the pristine goodness that was always there. This is what an anav is. It's a person that they're not in denial. They know who they are. They know everything that they have in life. But on the other hand, they always have that little room. There's always that space within them that they look to it and they say, no matter what I've accomplished in my life, in my career, at essence, this is who I really am. I'm a little child who is pure and innocent, and everything that I have in life is a gift. As the Torah says, we have to realize that everything that we have, Kihu hanusein lecha koach, Hashem is the one that gives us the koach, lasos chayil. Everything that we accomplish is from Hashem's bracha. When we come to that appreciation, then everything that we have, we won't be boastful about. The more that we have, it will make us feel more humble. So in fact, the talents that we have are not a source of arrogance. The more talented we have, it's actually the opposite. It makes us feel even more humble, even more self-effacing in Hashem's presence. We'll conclude with a story they tell about one of the Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Reb Pinchas Reizes. He was a great Chassid, but he was also quite affluent. And he built in his home, he was from Shklov, he built a very, very lavish house. Very wide, very tall. And once the Alter Rebbe came to visit him, and he was quite surprised, a chassid of this level of piety, of midos, of character traits that which should be refined. It found it was not in good taste. It was unbecoming of a chassid to have such a lavish home. And when the chassid noticed his Rebbe's surprise, he said, Rebbe, listen, now that I have such a beautiful home, all of the big meetings that happen with all the community activists and leaders, they always take place in my home. Now that I have the meeting taking place on my turf, I am able to advocate with all of these people that if there's anybody who is needy, who needs the city fund to help them in various ways, I am able to have a very influential impact and deciding where the funds should go, because it's taking place in my home. So, in conclusion, a person sometimes, when they have all of their talents, they have all their beautiful things, that might make them humble. And sometimes we might feel that we should try to shy away from our greatness. We should try to conceal, to stifle it, because it makes us feel uncomfortable. So the flip side of being humble, it is that it's important to know that any greatness that we may have, we should not be afraid of it. We should actually channel it and harness it, because if we are using it for a positive cause, for a holy purpose, then there's no need to camouflage it, to cover it up. Rather, we should be proud about it, so long as we're using it for a holy and noble purpose. And thus, the Rebbe once explained, there's the Talmud at the end of the tractate of Sota, it talks about when the Rebbe, one of the great Jewish leaders in our history, he passed away. He was a man of many, many great virtues. And the Talmud and the Mishnah says that when Rebbe passed away, one of the virtues that was lost out was humility, was the virtue of being humble. But there was a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Yosef, he says, no, you got to fix that, because even though Rebbe passed away, I am still here, and I am humble. I am humble, and therefore, you don't have to worry. And this statement of Rabbi Yosef really raised a very, very troubling question by many of the commentators. How is it possible? You're saying that you're humble, and how can you really be humble? It's like the rabbi we mentioned before who says, look who thinks he's humble. If you are truly humble, how could you go around and say, I am humble? But in light of the way we explained it, the Rebbe says, no. If a person, what humility is all about, as we mentioned before, it's about honesty. It's about being clear about who you are. So if you truly know yourself, and you're being honest with yourself, so here's the irony. If a person wasn't humble, they'd be afraid to walk around and say, I'm humble, because that would undermine their credibility. But if you're not worried about what people think, if you are truly humble and you feel humble, and that's a virtue that you have, so then someone like Rabbi Yosef, who was truly pure about his intentions and about how he felt about life, he could truly say, I'm humble. And it's not a contradiction to his humility. Because if you have that talent, if you have a special virtue or character trait in your life, you should indeed harness it and use it out for its greatest potential. May it be Hashem's will that we take all of the talents that Hashem gives us, materially and spiritually, and realize them and fulfill them, maximize them to the greatest extent in our lives and the lives of all of those who are connected with us, and may we merit to the coming of Mashiach b'mher v'meinu, amen.